the 25th day of May. Boom, this month is gone. Welcome everybody. Except for the music. Playing hard to get. The music is tonight. I'm Dana. Yay. Durnford, how are you folks doing? I think the nuclear industry is trying to wear me down. That's what's going on. They figured if we tell enough big lies and whoppers, I won't be able to handle it. They're right. They've only got me to crack. If you want to crack, you can call in 709-589-4406. The lines are all open. Good night, everybody. Let's get after it, I suppose. Hey. So the first story, they're going to say Reactor 1 is the worst reactor out of 4. Reactor 3, of course, ejected the core and the fuel pools right out of the building. I'll show you the videos. And Reactor 3 was mixed oxide fuel. The mixed oxide fuel is where they used high-grade uranium, reclaimed uranium, reclaimed plutonium. Reclaim uranium, reclaim plutonium. Plutonium, bad. Very bad. Just trying to get oriented here. No subscribers in the last 2 weeks. Barely get 100 views after 15 hours. This week has been dismal. What's up with that? Why so desperate to censor me, I wonder? So Korea, we're going to cover that fable. So Korea went to Fukushima, left today. There was 21 experts, nuclear experts, and they had a predetermined outcome, it turns out, which is a story from Japan pretty well explains that without acknowledging it. Cooling Fukushima possible after connection to the grid. I want you to think about that statement. The date on that is the 22nd of March, 10 days after. And so this is France 24, the government of France, media, which is syndicated worldwide. All 6 of the crippled Fukushima nuclear reactors were reconnected to the grid on Tuesday. That's pretty impressive when there's nothing left of the buildings. And 1,300 miles of the coastline was washed out to sea. Okay, so the hell are we going to do with the crazies, I wonder? Japan's nuclear watchdog asked TEPCO, the watchdog, instead of doing it themselves, asked TEPCO, which is a non-decommissioning authority, is only kept in position of power on paper, right? So that you blame TEPCO instead of the nuclear watchdog, the nuclear agencies, the nuclear industry. To assess the risk from the damaged reactor, and I was like, oh God, what can this be? A nuclear watchdog asked the operator, the non-decommissioned TEPCO, which went bankrupt right away, was nationalized by the Japanese government. TEPCO doesn't only exist on paper. It's a fictional company. Japan's wrecked Fukushima nuclear plant to assess potential risk from damage found in the key structure inside the worst hit of the 3 melter reactors. 4 melted down, not 3. And look who this is by, no less, Mari Yamaguchi. What's the odds of that? She comes out with the cover story every single time since 2011. Whenever the official cover story was breaking, the first one to come out with it is Mari Yamaguchi. Total coincidence, I'm pretty sure, but worth noting. Inside the worst hit of the 3 melter reactors, inside the worst hit, if somebody would hit me, big stick, and just beat the shit out of me till I can't do these videos anymore. Plants Unit 1. Unit 1. There's Unit 1. Here's a video of Unit 1. Now it's hard to comprehend how big these buildings actually are. But this is a contraption that they built for Reactor 1. So they put that around Reactor 1 and kept it there for 5 years. Now the panels are massive. They're held in place by gravity. Nobody can go there because there's a meltdown. But look how big this actually is. Wrap your mind around it. Because that's Unit 1 frame. That's important for this particular story. Okay, so Reactor 1. Here's the explosion of Reactor 1. I got better. Now this is from 27 miles away on a security camera. They zoomed in on the camera. But I showed you how big the facility, each of those buildings, you can see how big they actually are, right? So Reactor 3 was the only one that was MOX fuel. The number 3 MOX spent fuel rods are spread out and the surrounding area is contaminated with plutonium. You can never return to this place again. But the biggest byproduct of the radiative fuel rods are curium isotopes. And curium isotopes, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. And plutonium is nothing to sneeze at, no pun intended. Don't worry, we'll get there. So it blew up, but that's officially that's the spent fuel pool that they're putting to your left. I got to draw you a picture, unfortunately. I'm a terrible drawer. Pretty good with the videos, but I'm a terrible drawer. Dana. Don't forget the So I'll show you clearer videos where the fuel pool actually goes up about a half a mile. They felt that explosion 25 miles away. I just want to show you how slippery this lot actually is. So they built this contraption off site, then they brought it in, assembled it with cranes on the stump of Reactor 3. Reactor 3 is over there. The fuel pools are at the very top of the building. There's 2 of them. And they're stuffed with reactor cores because they don't have a repository anywhere, let alone Japan. So the reactor core is also at the very top of the building. And pretty obvious to anybody with a single eyeball. You can still figure out that that's gone, even if you only got one eyeball. That's the detonation of Reactor 3. It exploded. And you'll see big chunks falling pretty quick compared to everything else. That's the fuel pools in the reactor cores falling out of the sky. Okay. So this is reactor 3. You can see the stump of reactor 3, right? So I overlaid a video of them claiming they're inside the fuel pool at the top of the building, at the top up there, above it, looking down on it, on top of that, of that building over there, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no top to the building. I'll get it out of the way because this is hideous enough as it is. You don't need to see me too.
This is very strange to be standing inside here because this huge structure I'm standing inside is right on top of reactor building number 3. And down underneath me here is the melted reactor core inside this building. Over the top here they have built a shield to lower the radiation levels so that we can come up here, so that workers can come up here to construct this. But radiation levels are still very high here, and because of that we can only spend a few minutes here. Now if you come over here, there's my alarm going off. This is the spent fuel pool. Down inside here are more than 560 spent fuel assemblies.
So they're on above the fuel pool looking way down on it. That's a pretty neat trick. They could probably do that act in Las Vegas and make a lot more money, right? So they built that contraption over there to manipulate you so that he can... That was BBC, Rupert Winfield Hayes, by the way. Just remind you of this story here from 2011, the 21st of March, 10 days later. The troubled past of Fukushima, how the stricken nuclear fuel plant failed safety checks and crammed its buildings with more uranium than they could stand, which is a hell of a lot more than 500 assemblies, by the way. Okay. And this is the second. We'll go back to the original story after this one. Japan-stricken Fukushima nuclear plant in one of the country's worst safety records was crammed with more uranium than it was designed to hold. All of those boiling water reactors with the fuel pools at the top are doing the same thing, by the way. America has 70 of them. So here's what's left of the building. The buildings are 190 feet tall. And so it's hard to comprehend how big that actually is. So think of that right there. How neatly... What do they got to make all these stories so complicated for? I got a bunch of stories I want to get to, but this is pretty important. So that's about what's left of the actual building, right? Will you give me that? That's what's left of the actual building. So that's what's left of the actual building, but then the whole building would look, you know, that's reactor 1, by the way. We're talking about reactor 3, right? So this is about what's left of reactor 3 right here, my fingers too. The rest is gone, right? Now the reactor fuel pools and reactor cores at the very top of the building. I don't know if you noticed it, but reactor 1 is missing something that every reactor actually needs. So there's this little stump left, but to give you context, you can see Buddy right there, you can see some structures. You can realize this is huge, right? They're 150 feet wide and originally 190 foot tall. Now that's gone. And this was mixed oxide fuel. A lot of that was in the pools. Currently, they have 4 reactors running on mixed oxide fuel in Japan, which defies any kind of rationale whatsoever. It's a death wish for humanity. When you take the fuel out of the reactor core, there's no containment. You put it in a pool. It's hemorrhaging the isotopes into the environment. That's what the fuel does, because it's splitting the atoms, right? That's why. So that's secret knowledge. That's why you see so many people on the show tonight, right? 13? Got a new record here tonight, 13. We got a poll. Does reactor 3 have worse damage than reactor 1? And so I should have put in there, does it look worse? Because I was trying to make a point, and I didn't articulate it properly, I don't think, so I'm paying the price for it now. I can't tell the difference anyway. The worst hit of the 3 melter reactors, number 1, which is this one here. Now that's a total meltdown. I'll show you that. They lost its fuel pools, lost the reactor cores. It's as bad as it gets. But max fuel is a lot worse, and max fuel is very, very easy to because the fuel pool is gone. The reactor core is, you can see it if you look at how the building works. You can tell they're easily gone, right? But number 1, it leaves you with this little shadow of a doubt. It's gone. So once it goes through the chain reaction the first time, that's normal for a reactor. And the elements now, all of a sudden, are 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So when you take it out of the reactor and you reclaim these 2 million times worse than the original was, or industrial poison, and you put it through a chain reaction again, it's 2 billion rather times 2 billion times worse than what it was before. And so now that it's splitting the atoms into the environment after, they don't know what to do with this stuff. It's vicious. The releases are vicious. This is why Canada, United States didn't have now the industry has tried numerous times and almost succeeded in the mixed oxide fuel, but it's illegal. They're currently changing the laws to make it illegal because the industry is so powerful. There's no resistance. But it's not it's the worst thing you can do for a planet, because it's hemorrhaging so much isotopes all day long into the environment. You can't contain it. You're sabotaging humanity in the 8 million species. And so they say about 880 tons of highly radioactive melted nuclear fuel remains inside the plant's 3 reactors. Don't believe anything this industry tells you. Is the one thing, there is no reactors left. This is reactor 4, by the way. So the first thing they done was gutted it to your right and down to that stump, and put a cover over it, and then pretended that it looks like the picture to your left, because they're both the official pictures. So right away, you're dealing with lunatics. This is a lunatic industry. But it's an industry that took a lot of chances. In order to pull off this deceit, they went to extraordinary lengths. So they cooked up their best ABC from Australia, CNN, BBC, Rupert Winfield Hayes, who I showed you earlier, was in reactor 3 that don't exist, is in reactor 4 that don't exist. CBS, Seth Thorne, is an actual senator's son. And that's just a fraction of the media. And they're pretending they're in the fuel pool on top of the building alongside of it, reactor 4. That's the official picture to your left. So in these pictures, they're pretending they're looking down on us.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
So this is really confusing because you're in the pool at the top of the building up here, looking down, and they're looking way down on it. They're at the very, almost at the roof itself of a building that don't exist. So why would they take a chance and deceive to manipulate the whole planet by doing something like that? Because that's extraordinary. That's extraordinary. And so how can we trust media doing stuff like that ever again? How's that actually work? Experts have said most of the melted fuel inside of Unit 1, believed to be the worst hit. They're all melted down for sure. But visually, they reference Reactor 1 and 2 because they don't look as bad as 3 and 4, see? And 3 and 4 is where they pretend that they're in the buildings that actually don't even exist. They haven't done that at Reactor 1 or Reactor 2. Reactor 3, the entire nuclear core was ejected into the environment. Well, that would be the worst in that, see? But like I've been covering this live for so long, I get offended when they say stuff like that. And that's unusual now, because they're planning. Wait till we still got to get to the punchline yet. Let me back that up. You can see the big chunks falling really fast. So watch how the smoke debris is progressing, but look at the big chunks, how they fall really fast out of the sky. Watch that again. So it detonates. That's a beautiful detonation. Look at that puppy. And so it actually ejected the fuel pools and the reactor cores, because you see them falling really fast because they're so heavy, right? Let me play it at regular speed for you. There we go. Let me check and make sure it's actually at regular speed. Yeah, at regular speed. And, well, for whatever the video is. The video is slowed down. So if I speed it up, let me see, at 150%, will that get it to the speed it normally was? I don't think that does it justice either. That's pretty close to the originals, the actual speed. I'm going to speed it up 200% here. Just bear with me. Here we go, 200% of the video that was slowed down. So that's much closer to the speed, right? And remember how big these buildings and wide they actually are and how tall they actually are, right? That's Unit 1. Melted fuel from Reactor 3 is the highly lethal mixed oxide fuel MOX fuel. It was supposed to be the last to attempt the fuel removal, but you can't remove fuel from a building that don't exist anymore. You get where I'm going? Whereas Reactor 1 detonated, and I showed you the detonation, the fuel pool was ejected. It was burnt for a couple of days straight. Spent fuel removal from the Unit 1 reactor cooling pool. That's what it's all about, see? Spent fuel removal from the Unit 1 reactor cooling pool is to start in 2027 after a 10-year delay. Now remember, they removed the fuel from the pool of the Reactor 4. That building doesn't even exist. They removed the fuel from the pools of Reactor 3, and that building doesn't exist. So now they want to remove the fuel from Reactor 1 fuel pool that doesn't exist. That's the punchline. Right? And the original footage of Unit 3, They used remote control cranes and stripped away the debris, and this is what was left. It was just that little stump. And remember, it should be about that size. That's about the same size, but the whole building would be this high, not this high. Because the fuel pools were at the top of the building, not the bottom of the building. But in reactor 1, they went China syndrome. I'll show you that coming up in a second. Some of it did. Once all the spent fuel is removed from the pool, the melted debris was taken out of the reactor. The reactor was at the top of the building that don't exist. So they built this contraption off-site, and then they brought it in, assembled it with cranes, and they probably sacrificed a couple of hundred homeless. And in academic terms, sacrifice is killing. And they say they sacrificed the beagle dogs and beagle puppies. It meant they killed them. So they kept this Kevlar sarcophagus on the stump on reactor 1 for 5 years. And by the way, like the stacks, quite a ways away from that where they vent these buildings, you can't get close to that because it's 25 sieverts of lethal doses. So if you cut out a square foot of this material and took it to the New York subway and you laid it at the top or the last exit going down to the subway, so everybody had to walk past it. Everybody will die that walks past it for the next 10,000 years. Imagine how toxic it is, because you're cooking now the structure that's inside of it. Like, think of a smokehouse, but this is a death machine. This is nuclear. Spent fuel removed from reactor 1 cooling fuel pool is to start in 2027. But the building, this is the detonation of reactor 1. Why you gotta make everything so friggin' hard, Dana? I get it back up to. We do that again. So the detonation is real. These are huge buildings, right? So that building, the fuel pool, that's the detonation of it. We've never seen nothing like this ever in history of nuclear. Right? Multiple reactors. They hid away reactor 3 fuel pool and pretended they got the reactor fuel out of that. They pretend they got the fuel out of reactor 4 fuel pool. And they're on top of pretending they're on top of a building, because they got 70 of these buildings in the United States, so they didn't need to go to Japan to shoot that footage, right? They're identical. Okay, IAEA informed in March the number 1 reactor core started melting down 50 minutes after the cooling stopped. Now that'll burn, once it melts down, it's not going to melt down at 1,000 degrees. Meltdown is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,000 degree temperatures. It's going to cook the fuel pool, which is slightly above it or adjacent to it. It's impossible that the bulk of the melted fuel is in Unit 1 containment. And again, charred vessel, they can't quantify these types of assertions. Some of the numbers are at 225 sieverts per hour at number 1 in 2011. This is a lethal dose from quite a long distance. There's no cameras or anything that's going to work in that environment, by the way. So, most don't know, but the reactor 1 melted down in 5 hours. We almost lost 1/3 of the country due to Fukushima. Well, no, they're pretending it didn't melt down, see? Exhibit number 1. A video believed to show parts of the internal structure in Fukushima Unit 1 containment vessels scattered around. 3-inch. Now, you can't shoot a video at where there's 225 sieverts because everybody falls down and plays dead. except that they're actually dead. So at 1,000,000, 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. So what is 1,000,000? I'm melting. TEPCO confirms steam came up from underground at reactor. Don't say it, Dana. Don't say it. Reactor 1. 4.7 sieverts, the steam coming out of the ground. Because the reactor core, some of it that didn't go out of the building or burn continuously and create plumes out of the building, which radioactive fallout covers the planet. So this is around reactor 1. This is 40 times the regular speed. And the steam you're seeing is lethal everywhere. You have to evacuate the whole site. There's a lot of cracks in the ground, steam splashed out from there sometimes, and we have detected 10 sieverts an hour at 6 places. 10 sieverts, 3 sieverts is lethal dose. But you're talking about a whole site where everything is 10 sieverts, so the X-rays, the gamma shines, the neutron bombardments, the beta rays are stunning. These are lethal on a whole different level than... But, so when you look at... So this says the original pictures. This is reactor 3. Almost, 3 weeks later, Natalie Wolchover came out with a story saying Fukushima reactor leak was plugged with liquid glass. What's that? It's a mixture of sawdust and newspaper. So does anybody believe that a mixture in sawdust and newspaper plugged the hole in reactor 3, for instance? So it's quite an interesting thing to say. It's not that interesting, though, when you compare it to what they've already done. But it's definitely interesting when you go all the way back to 3 Mile Island and they claim they plugged that one, too. And, oh, yeah, they call it a leak. A leak. Everything that happens at a nuclear accident is by proxy a leak. And they'll use that 20 times in a story, and you won't blink an eye. Okay, next story. God, how long did that take us? That was 30 minutes. It's important because they're claiming they're going to take the fuel out of a pool that don't exist, like they did at reactor 3 and 4. So you got to cause a little controversy and try to get people jacked up and interested in the topic. Otherwise, everybody... Concerns build a South Korea team concludes Fukushima nuclear plant visit. Yeah, concern. Now, I done a couple of videos a few days ago, and they all got censored to absurd low numbers. And, I wanted them to take a picture, a selfie, where these people are in that building, which is a pretty good idea, I think. And I wanted them to count the tanks. And I'm a bit of a weirdo, and I counted the tanks, and I only got 750. Not 1,000. There's supposed to be 1,000. And so they show you these crop pictures so you can't count them yourself. That's what I would do if I was them too, right? If I was a scumbag like them. So Unit 1 and Unit 3, but Unit 3 is the worst one. So they gone down there, they're not questioning any of the narratives. And we'll get to the rest of the story after this story. We got a bunch of stories on South Korea to get into. Masters of incitement with no scientific grounds. When you look at this guy, does he remind you of Hang right? The guy was on the hunger strike, get a referendum to import food into Taiwan. He has that same posture and that same creepy look in his face, right? He's creepy as shit, this guy. The memories of Fukushima nuclear meltdown remain terrifyingly vivid, he claimed. Catastrophic aftermath of a monstrous earthquake and a tsunami wave as high as 39 meters, which is actually close to being honest, so that's kind of weird. Not used to them. They got to do that to suck you in, right? So you're talking 130 feet tsunami, and we know in some places it was 140. So we'll give him an A for that, but that's under a report card. On my way back to Tokyo, because he wasn't in Tokyo, that's where he's from, I learned of a hydrogen explosion at the Fukushima Daiichi plant, and a tsunami swelled over the seawalls, and chain explosions at 3 other reactors reported over the following day. So he's alluding to 4 reactors in that. I remember the thick rain over Tokyo from the contaminated clouds. He's pretty slick, isn't he? It's pretty unusual they'll admit anything like that. After the debris, the disaster reached the beaches of Southern California 3 months later. Well, the airborne plume reached it in about 16 days. You're probably not aware of that. Particularly if you've been around here a long time. This is probably the first time you ever heard that. Everybody's like, stop messing with me, Dan. I don't appreciate it. Hey, hang on. Don't be so jumpy. So this is, I got a lot of models. This is backed up by studies, too. So this is covering the planet from Fukushima in the first 16 days. The plume doesn't stop after 16 days. The model does, because you already covered the whole planet. Even though the contaminated water from the crippled, and I showed you the pictures, if they're crippled, then we're in a lot of trouble, because I hate to see what a destroyed reactor looks like. Apparently that only justified being called crippled. A building that don't exist no more. Can you imagine if he owned that was an apartment building, would he call it crippled? Even though the contaminated water from the crippled nuclear plant spread in the ocean, it was completely diluted. You can't dilute radiation. You just spread it out. And we're talking about a lot of it. We're talking about a lot. We're talking about within 6 years, just if it only went in the ocean. But remember, the ocean was all the oceans, all the fresh water was contaminated by 16 days. The consensus is around 19 days from the major institutions worldwide. Democratic, now this is South Korea, Party Chair Lee Jae-myung is protesting on the 20th, 5 days ago. He's in the center. And other opposition lawmakers joined a rally in downtown Seoul because people are protesting in the streets in South Korea. This is what he said they sent their fake delegation to Fukushima, right? They're trying to quell down dissent. To oppose the Japanese government's plan to discharge contaminated water from the crippled Fukushima reactor, which is actually destroyed, 4 of them, into the Pacific. And so they're doing that because that's the scam. That's reinforcing the deception that the tanks have all the radiation. That's what this is all about, right? They're claiming all the radiation is in the tanks. Right? They've been building up this narrative. They built all the tanks in 2013, early 2014. But the Riva system didn't, which was France's filtration system, didn't work in 2014. The Alps system didn't work in 2014, and the Surrey system didn't work in 2014 or any other year. But they want you to believe everything is in the tanks. So this is how the lie works. And it has to be reinforced. If you tell a lie enough, you'll build all this resistance to the fable, which reinforces the fable. This is what we're up against. This is why I'm censored so heavy, because the truth is so painfully obvious when you come around here and start having a real conversation. Your brain actually goes like, oh shit, he's got a point, maybe. Agricultural product triggered similar concern. Farm products from Fukushima have been shunned over cancer. And there's 1,800 diseases and illnesses and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries besides cancer. 1,800 diseases. Heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. Schizophrenia is just a fraction of them. The annual inspection of 10 million, and when thyroid is saturated, then you're producing radioactive hormones. And with children, you're mutating the stem cells because it's in the bones. And this is, think about the birds, think about the insects, think about the pollinators, think about the biota, the fungus, the bacteria, think about the substance of life. We can't live without in a broken food chain, and we've got it broken everywhere you look. The annual inspection, 10 million bags, right, we got to deal with this. And this constant lies and deception is not being challenged. And they got me ran into the ground for over a decade, and then they pissed me off, so I'm never going to go away. But we need a lot of people telling this story, and it needs to be accurate, because then you come up with solutions, right? You can't come up with solutions with a fable. The annual inspection, 10 million bags of rice harvested over the last 5 years from areas near the plant showed that 99% of them had a concentration, and again, when they mention cesium, they're being completely dishonest. And cesium's really bad, but they're being dishonest. That's the cover story too. Concentrations of 25, and so is tritium, concentration 25 becquerels per kilogram. You know, if you get 25 becquerels of cesium, you got 100 times more strontium-90, because that's the ratio they're produced. The reactors run on plutonium, uranium. The biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods is going to be curium isotopes, which are these are brutal. And they say far below the normal 100 becquerels a kilogram after rigorous contamination efforts, but the 100 becquerels a kilogram was created after the meltdowns. Pre that, and pre-meltdowns was 0.1 becquerels per kilogram was considered the maximum allowable limits. But originally, first year and a half, they had raised the limit to 500 becquerels a kilogram of just gamma, one of the gammas, cesium, 137 in particular. So they refused to acknowledge the thousands of other fission products. That's a real big deal. Nevertheless, doubts linger. Many still believe Japan is cheating. What an interesting way to frame that narrative. This questioning is based on disbelief, not science nor experience. Now, what he's doing is not science or experience. What a terrible human. He looks like a human, but he doesn't have any attributes of one. Democratic Party chair Lee Jae-myung attacked both Japan and the Korean government, and he portrayed Japan's discharge of the contaminated water into the sea as terrorism of the worst type, which it is, while defining Korea as a collaborator to the terrorist act, which they are. And it's like claiming that it's safe to drink the water off the same well of toxic substance, which is total misrepresentation. The water's already discharged into the sea. It hasn't stopped. The tanks are the fable. But is it rational to deny the finding of an international inspection? What are you talking about, though? So now you're claiming after 12 years you finally let somebody in there, which happens to be the pro-nuclear lawyers from South Korea. That's somehow everybody should go back to sleep now because, bear with me, and accused Japan of releasing toxic water, which is like, that's all they've done. Let me get that out of the way before we go any further. Why do they gotta lie so much? Makes my job a lot harder with all these lies. What am I looking for, Dana? My God, my brain is just frozen. How is that even possible? She was clicking pretty good earlier. God, I hate doing all the... I don't hate it, I suppose. That's the wrong word. I don't understand why hordes of people are not having this conversation, that's all. A little self-centered, Dana. TEPCO to August the 12th, that's 3.5 years later, to abandon the Riva water filtration system was the same as the Alps version, right? For the last 3 years, have been unused and kept out of operation. 2014, 3 years later, the Alps system has yet to function reliably. And there are certain parts of the site that don't have full control. You know what that means? You drop dead. The homeless drop dead. 2014, the groundwater bypass operation has no effect, where they're going to pump the water around that's coming down the mountain from getting into the site and direct it around into the ocean without going through the site. That didn't work. They're going to build a fence to stop the radiation from leaking. Did you see the pictures of the buildings earlier? Calling that a leak is just... the industry should be disbanded. We should be invaded by a country with common sense, right? To restrict contamination from leaking in the ocean, 2013, so there was no mitigation stopping it from going into the ocean. There was no way to filter it. And then they went into stupid mode and claimed they're going to build an ice wall. So why wouldn't you build a real wall? Why would you build an ice wall? Because it's not sincere, right? Okay, bear with me. So let's go to the tanks. Because I'm not sucker enough for punishment yet. That's supposed to be down. I wonder why that ended up at the top. Don't worry about it. Okay, so 2013, Mary Yamaguchi. They got 1,000 tanks, 2013, August. 2014, they got, and by the way, Mary Yamaguchi, they got 1,200 tanks. 2017, they got 900 tanks. And look at it, this is a marvel of humanity. Can anybody out there show me a video of somebody walking with both heels and feet flat on the ground? Stood up on steel plates. I don't know why they bothered to Photoshop it or do what they're doing, but they did, right? In 2019, in the bottom fourth line from the bottom, 1,000 tanks. 2021, 1,000 tanks. 2022, 1,000 tanks. 2023, 1,000 tanks. So 2013, 1,000 tanks. 2023, 1,000 tanks. How many tanks did they build in the last 10 years, Dana? I don't know. It seems like they didn't build any at all. A new map of the radioactive iodine showed 3 million becquerels a square meter all over that area. So how do you stop it from getting in the ocean? Right, these are weird questions, right? These were surveys at 1,000 feet above the ground, 3,000 becquerels per square meter. Okay, back to the other story. Japan has reduced the level of nearly all the radioactive materials in contaminated water below the stipulated standards of the World Health Organization. But why is the World Health Organization telling the whole planet how to think and what to do and everything else? Through advanced liquid processing systems, ELPS, which in 2014 didn't work, the series system for the cesium didn't work, and now it didn't work because as soon as you put this massive amount of radiation into it, it's so radioactive you can't get near it. It was built to manipulate you on purpose. Doubles the finding could make all members of the group of 7, such as the United States and France, simply supporters of terrorism. Well, they're terrorism. France and the United States, illegal dumping and accidents and everything else is the definition of terrorism. All the fuel pools worldwide are hemorrhaging into the environment. They have no containment. Doubling the findings could make all members of the group of 7 terrorists, eh? Korean scientists are among the IAEA's team regularly inspecting the sample from waters in tanks at a Fukushima nuclear plant. Politicians must base their accusations on solid science evidence and offer solutions if they truly wish to represent their people. That is how a normal political standard should be. This is a journalist we're talking about, folks. IAEA independent scrutiny based on strict safety standards, and the IAEA is 195 militaries that have taken over your planet. They don't have any standards. There is no such thing as an international law. There's this League of Nations, which turned in after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, changed their name to United Nations. The first thing they done was leveled North Korea, who'd been enslaved for 50 years by Japan, and now for 70 years by UN, land, sea, air embargoes, which is collective punishment against the women, the children, all the animals, the birds. If we deny IAEA's findings, which they're not regulators, they don't have any authorities. They're the bullies of the military-industrial complex, according to Eisenhower. We would be no different from China and North Korea, which habitually disclaim the IAEA, which is appropriate, unfortunately, because their legacy is horrific. Dangerous accusations over the government's inspections of Fukushima plant, I believe, in the very low radiation levels in his body from my annual test instead of the horrific memories of the 2011 meltdown. What a bizarre statement that is. I believe in the very low radiation levels, which is, we're talking, like, Fukushima is man-made. The stuff in your body is stardust. Everybody's already acclimated to it through genetic superior selection. And then the very last statement, he says, frankly, I am more worried about the contamination in our politics than what's in the sea. So this is a very influential Korean journalist. That's him there. And as soon as when you take, like, if you see him anywhere, he's going to make you nervous. That kind of look, right? Don't worry, this is normal. This is actually normal. These people have nothing but contempt. Their job is to lie to you. They got the education, they knew the jobs existed because they're the inbreeds of the inbreeds themselves. Alarming radiation levels near Fukushima 25 times higher than in Tokyo. So this was South Korea media couldn't accompany the South Korea nuclear scientists to Fukushima, and so they went to Fukushima, and I was like, oh shit! Wait till it shows you something, because I downplay everything, right? So that they can't ninny me to death, basically, because I've been at this for a long time, and that's one of their games, is to ninny you. I'll explain that to you in a second. In the realm of South Korea media, scant attention is being paid to the ongoing inspections mission taking place in Fukushima, Japan, where contaminated water poses a persistent threat. So they're talking about the water and these tanks, right? And always these cropped shots. You know, we counted the tanks. I have an absurd archive of every facet of this story on top of that. The reason beyond this lack of coverage lies in South Korea government's sympathetic stance towards its Japanese counterparts, leading media outlets to shy away from disseminating stories that criticize the authorities. They don't shy away from it. They refuse to do it. They work hand in hand. But the alarming level of radioactivity detected in Fukushima region captured significant interest on Tuesday. So, one news outlet, YTN, ventured into the town of Fukushima, which is 2 kilometers from the actual meltdowns, is abandoned for 12 years, but they just opened up 3% of it. It's a complicated story. I'll give you the short version, seeing as we're here. So the yellow sections, you see there, the red is the nuclear wastelands. The yellow is sections that are opening for 2023. So you can't open up little tiny sections of a nuclear wasteland and claim it's safe, but that's what they're doing. And they can't get anybody to move in there, thank goodness. The readings of the radiation in this area found to be staggering 25 times higher than those observed in Tokyo. Now, the equipment that they're using is shocking. We'll get to that in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Curiously, the South Korean media finds itself entirely excluded from the inspection team itinerary, a request apparently made by the Japanese government not to let the media there. You're not allowed to bring cameras. The so-called delegation is not going to show us pictures or videos of their trip because it's illegal. Consequently, some media organizations resorted to monitoring the team's activities by observing nearby regions. In this case, their reporters had reportedly gone to great lengths to capture footage of the team's entrance into the plant, and I haven't seen that. A dozen years after the disaster, town of Fukushima remains mired in hardship. It's a nuclear wasteland, with 14 million one-ton bags of radiation stored there on top of that. Vacant homes and deserted establishment populated area, white bags of soil, most of them are black, contaminated with radioactive materials scattered throughout the town. There's 14 million. Radiation levels registered at the entrance to the village, 2 kilometers from the plant, measured 2.5 microsieverts per hour. Like, in reality, it's absurdly worse than that. It's absurdly worse than 2.5 microsieverts. But this is really important, what I'm going to show you. Microsieverts. You're going to measure, by the way, you should be measuring becquerels, atomic decays per second. Miyagi, about 7 miles away, and Nami, you're talking 10 million becquerels a kilogram. 10 million becquerels a kilogram. not microsieverts. Certain areas exceeded 5 microsieverts, an alarming 25 to 50 times higher than Tokyo's. And Tokyo, we've seen it at almost 28 million becquerels per square meter. These are absurd numbers. You're supposed to evacuate Tokyo. So this Geiger counter that they're using only measures gamma. Meanwhile, the Fukushima contaminated water inspection team devoted approximately 9 hours to comprehensively tour of the facility connected to the management of the contaminated water. And I was like, what am I looking at here? Right, so you can see something thousands counts per second is equal to 2 millisieverts an hour is equal to 200 micro rems an hour. What is that? So I looked up the. This is not the same one. I looked up, and that was the first one I came to. 500,000 counts per minute is equal to 100 millisieverts, which works out to 5 becquerels a microsievert. 5 becquerels a microsievert. Okay, so the one they're using is the 10,000 counts per second, is 2 millisieverts, is 200 rims. Which means, because I usually so 1.4 microsieverts is like 7 becquerels. So 5 becquerels is equal to a microsievert, folks. Now they you know, 2 of us can't be wrong. There's betas and alphas and neutrons and gammas, and they bang into each other. They're all traveling at pulsing energy every second at the speed of light, just shy of the speed of light. And so when they hit each other, they don't mingle. They crash. It's a car crash, and they change direction, and that causes another phenomenon known as X-ray. So you got gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas, and also X-ray. But you also got gamma shine and neutron bombardment and beta shines too, right, from particulates of the fuel itself. That's not in this equation. And these are not very good. These are only going to measure a fraction. But they're in Fukushima, which is continuously polluted because the reactors are constantly melting down. And these are at ground zero. So a zero possibility that would be even remotely close. The bags, by the way, are 100,000 becquerels a kilogram. But that's an interesting one, right? Because 10,000 counts per minute is equal to 2 millisieverts. So when you break it down, there's 1,000 microsieverts in a millisievert. You end up with 5 becquerels a microsievert, which means at the average around here, it's around 35 microsieverts. So Canada should be evacuated. And we're only acknowledging gamma. This is why all the species are disappeared over the last 12 years. That's why, you know, I haven't seen a bumblebee yet or a wasp. There's no migratory birds. We got to get out and look for birds. We got to get a baseline. The research is more important than everything. It's hard to comprehend how important it is. This is why they're censoring us so much, right? Because we do the work. But, you know, we had a few setbacks, multiple heart attacks, kidney stones, cancer, all in less than a year. And but I still have that passion. I have the most important asset is passion to do the job, and as it comes out in the story when I tell the story, the passion that I actually have for humanity and for the 8 million species, and by proxy I have to help the scumbags too, the nuclear industry. Representatives of the degenerate Tokyo Electric Power Company guided the team throughout the tour. So they don't have any freedom. They weren't, even if they were sincere, which the South Korea, time of the South Korea delegations, they're not sincere. In front of TEPCO's decommissioning museum in Fukushima, which is a nuclear wasteland, he spent $50 million on it. Fukushima Prefecture, the head of which is an abandoned nuclear wasteland, the head of the Korea Atomic Energy Safety Institute, who I have nothing but disrespect for now, addressed the media stating, "Today we have visited all the facilities that were part of our planned itinerary. Coinciding with the South Korea on-site inspection, the Japanese government hinted at lifting the ban on Fukushima seafood imports." Never waste a crisis, I suppose. "Throughout this inspection, we aim to enhance our understandings of the safety standards governing the discharge of the ousts treated water into the ocean in regards to South Korea." So this is a foregone conclusion, apparently, according to these people. Notably, Nomura, the Minister of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, not nuclear, personally broached the topic of lifting import restrictions on Fukushima seafood during a post-meeting press conference. Post-meeting press conference. Like a boxing match, eh? NHK reported in his words stating, "While this visit primarily revolves around the investigation of the treated water, which we know is not treated, I would also like to make a plea for the removal of import bans." Never wasted a second. "No, you don't need samples to go back. You came, you saw. Now let's get on with it." The world, all the protesters, beat them up, send them home. Adding to the discourse, what discourse? NHA disclosed as the government representative conveyed the notion that we would request to South Korea lift the import embargoes on seafood and other related products. They're not even back in Korea yet. It's just like, wow. They're such scumbags they can't contain themselves for an extra day. Main opposition Democratic Party leader, which is Lee Jung-mung, who I showed you earlier, is on the 20th sitting with protesters. Don't release the treated tritium water, right, to enforce the deceit and dishonesty and lies. On Monday, condemned the inspection team's mission as three blind mice, characterized by a lack of samples, a lack of definitive list, and an absence of media verification. Good luck on media for being honest. That's a fable, like a unicorn and a Sasquatch, right? Japanese media already speculate that the inspection team will lead to the resumption of Fukushima seafood import. So they're still on their way to the airport to head back to South Korea, and Japan's media is coming out and everything is, yay! He cautioned, expressing genuine apprehension that the Yoon administration is simply following Japan's predetermined script. No, that's exactly that's what their job was. The hoodwink. Because South Korea has a lot of protesters that are jacked up because they believe the lie. This is how it worked. This is on purpose. That they're happy about that. They needed that to keep the lie, to make the lie real. See? And ultimately, the best way to seal the deal will be for Japan to concede and say, well, okay, you win. We're not going to dump the radioactive water into the ocean. We'll deal with it. We'll store it somewhere. And yay, the ocean was saved, when in reality, the ocean has already been slaughtered. But that's what they're probably up to. That most likely why they're doing things to ADR. That makes sense. Right, from forensic investigative journalism, which is what I do, that makes sense. Because I can back up those assertions with documentation. The team also checked the water, and I have over and over and over. You can check my playlist. The team also checked the water tanks, and in particular, they checked the water tanks. You know, the tanks. Like, if you filled up those tanks with water you're pouring over the reactor cores, because when you pour it over the reactor core, you got to think about how big this actually is, how much, right, how volatile and deadly, and what the actual isotopes are actually going to be. I'll give you an example, if you just bear with me. It's a fascinating industry, isn't it? TEPCO made Fukushima plant a machine for generating radioactive water. Runoffs from molten atomic core now in the groundwater in the ocean. That doesn't sound like it's in tanks. That's the wrong one. Up to a full sievert in NAMI, but the water has only got tritium in it, ain't it? Two sieverts a liter. So if you fill up the tank at 2 sieverts a liter, you're talking about 1.4 million sieverts of just gamma. Or is this beta? Beta. Well, it can't be just beta. It's got to be alphas and neutrons, too. It's got to be gamma there at the same animosity equivalence. So you can't build another tank on the site if you fill up one of the tanks. You can't step over the hoses. That's a lethal dose. Or the pipes that's running to the tanks. If you try to filter 2 sieverts a liter, the filter, you can never change the filter again. And after 20 minutes, the water that's going through the filter, if you put pure water through the filter, will be more than that. Because that's how it works. Well, TEPCO made Fukushima plant into a genocide machine. That's what it should say. The operator TEPCO, so you don't blame the nuclear industry, who you should be blaming, the nuclear lobbying groups, has said that all the radioactive material will be removed. But TEPCO is not some master nuclear, didn't solve all the riddles. Or we'd be doing it everywhere, worldwide. Well, TEPCO figured it out. We're all going to do it. The world has a future. No. All right, and then they regurgitated those 2 sentences. We'll remove from the to-be released water, except tritium, which experts say is not harmful to human health in small amounts. Of course, this is what they use in nuclear weapons to double and quadruple the power of the nuclear weapon is tritium. Now, there is nothing in the tanks. The tanks were empty. The tanks were built to manipulate it, and I showed you that documentation earlier. The terminology surrounding treated radioactive water has also attracted controversy. While the Japanese government officially referred to the water as treated, Korean government officials have largely referred to the water as contaminated. Well, like, there's nothing in the tanks. Let me explain that to you. They don't make it easy to tell the story, do they? So the problem is there's so many lies in every single story. If you try to challenge every lie, you'll be like me, where you pull most of the hair out of your head with your 2 hands. Okay, so I got a couple questions for everybody. If I can keep it together long enough. Oh, I got done wrong this time. So we got the quad ready today. And it's like 4 hours work today. I'm so stiff, it's not funny. But it's time for me to start. Summer's coming. We'll be here in June maybe, right? We got to get ready. Because summer's late here out in the Atlantic Ocean. We're out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on an island. We're sitting ducks for radiation. What am I looking for, Dana? Okay. Load, okay. So, I just want to put this puppy to rest about Japan. We'll get there. Here we go. Let's try this one more time, Dana. Stop talking and get the shit you need first. Okay. Oh, I screwed that up, did I? I forgot to fix that. It's okay. This will make sense. Just bear with me. This is going to be funny. We want to do a good job, so bear with me. This is worth it. Because, like, how do I give you the ability to beat the shit out of this industry? Well, you gotta hit it from many different directions. So that takes a bit of work for me. Well, I just thought of the best way to tell the story, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Okay. Hang on, I got one more part I got to do before I can start. Because nothing's cut and dry until it's cut and dry. I just wanted to put that puppy to bed. And when it comes to this subject, there's no shortcuts. Good God. I do that too. The madness never ends, eh? Oh shit. We might be in trouble here. Oh. Woohoo! I figured it. Oh, now we're gone, are we? Now we don't even exist anymore? Well, that's just great. Hang on, I'm almost there. Well, my system froze up on me, but I had something touching my keyboard. Had me panicking for a second. That's one. And where's two at? Oh, there you are. All right, we're ready to go. We just got to you got to beat the shit out of their narrative, that's all. I'm actually pretty good at this, so strap yourselves in and hang on tight. There we go. So if everything is in the tanks, that's the official story, right? Everything is in the tanks. Let me just run you through the nightmare that we're talking about. So how can you have 70,000 becquerels a kilogram That light was in my eye. So the Chiba incinerator, which is right alongside of Tokyo, the incinerator dust is 70,000 becquerels a kilogram. How can everything be in the tanks, right, if it's 70,000 becquerels a kilogram in the incinerators in Chiba? And how can it be in the tanks if they got 30 million one-ton bags of it picked up? How does that work? Mystery black substance of 1 million becquerels a kilogram of cesium. You divide that by 5 to get microsieverts. Seen all over Minnesota. So how can it be millions of becquerels a kilogram? 64 million becquerels per square meter in Minnesota if it's in the tanks, which are, Minnesota, by the way, is surrounded by millions of one-ton bags, and are growing food alongside of thousands and thousands of one-ton bags directly alongside of them. And they're in a nuclear wasteland surrounded by 14 prefectures where the food was banned by 55 countries. How can it be in the tanks? You hear me? You feel me? How can it be in the tanks when it's 10 million becquerels a kilogram of cesium detected Minnesota soil sample? Just cesium. So start adding everything onto that that's actually going to be there. You know, the alphas, the betas, the neutrons, all the different daughters. How can you have 10 million becquerels a kilogram if it's all in the tanks? And that they picked up millions, 30 million one-ton bags that they admitted to in 2017, 2018. How can you have 20 million becquerels a kilogram in communities if it's all in the tanks? Sorry. When the first one drops the fuel rod and dies, the next one pick it up and run with it. That's what they're actually saying there. Kind of sneezes death, Dana. That's pretty pathetic. Yeah, I'm pathetic. That's why. You know, and everybody knows I'm pathetic because I beat the shit out of myself 7 days a week doing this. While the media just gets out there and cuts your throat. Then plays soccer with your head. And the world says, I love journalists. They're so fantastic. I wish I was a journalist. 50,000 becquerels a kilogram in soil near Tokyo. 10,000 microsieverts, 10 millisieverts in the soil near Tokyo. So how can it be in the soil in Tokyo at those numbers and be in the tanks? Because I counted the small tanks too, and I still only got 750. How can it be in the tanks when everybody ran away and left their homes and cities and communities behind? And if you filter the numbers we're talking about, you can't stand up there ever again. It's drop dead. You're going to drop dead right away. Because that needs to be 4 feet thick lead just to stop you from getting a lethal dose immediately from the gamma shines, the X-rays, neutron bombardments, the beta rays. How can it have 175,000 becquerels flowing in just one river 60 kilometers from the nuclear meltdown if it's all in the tanks? How can you have 6.5 million becquerels a square meter 60 miles from the meltdowns if it's all in the tanks? How can you have every organism in Fukushima's entire prefecture, 6,000 square miles, contaminated with radiation, if it's in the tanks? Is that confusing or something? How can it be 500,000 becquerels a kilogram of radioactive cesium 75 miles from the Fukushima plant if everything is in the tanks? How can you have 170,000 becquerels a kilogram in the sewage in Tokyo, 250 kilometers away, if everything is in the tanks? How does that work? What kind of friggin' voodoo is that? Tokyo turned out to be as contaminated as Fukushima. How can Tokyo be as contaminated as Fukushima if everything is in the tanks? How can Tokyo be under radiation threat if everything is in the tanks, Dana? Well, it can't. That's right. How can you have 29 million becquerels a square meter in the soil in Tokyo, 250 kilometers away, if everything is in the tanks? I don't know, Dana. That's a good question. Will somebody give me that? Yeah, tanks of deception. So awesome. I got to take James's Lucid's lead and just break it down into 3 simple words. James could probably do my show in about 30 minutes or less. It'll take me 2 hours. I'll learn someday, hopefully. I'm trying. How can you have 276,000 becquerels a kilogram? A kilogram. You need 64 of them to make a square meter. In Tokyo, 250 kilometers away, if everything is in the tanks of deception. Which makes perfect sense, don't it? You're going to have neutron rays in Tokyo, uranium in Chiba, if everything is in the 750 tanks. There's not 1,000. We know that because we counted them ourselves. How can you have, now the black substance we're talking about is 5 to 10 million becquerels a kilogram. It's everywhere in Tokyo. How can you have that all over Tokyo if it's in the tanks? Japan Prime Minister studies setting up alternative capital away from Tokyo because I just showed you Tokyo is absurdly radioactive. So if you're worried about the tanks, then you're being misdirected, right, on purpose. It's everywhere. 230 kilometers from Fukushima, the black substance, which is a fungus that accumulates radiation, aggregates it, so to speak, right? And these are brutal hot spots to walk past for children and that. Strontium found in 2,200 locations. Not surprising, it's in Yokohama, 250 kilometers away. But strontium-90, they're talking about, found in 2,200 locations. So how can it all be in all the tanks? And every time you see these pictures, they crack me up because right, they're all walking around. Some of them got these black plastic bags. They're in paper suits. Nobody's doing nothing. Everybody is like, it's like some kind of video game where everybody's walking around banging into each other and then you change direction. Most of that is Photoshop. Now, I don't know why it's Photoshopped, but I'm pretty sure it's Photoshopped because when you really look at it, that's the only equation that fits. And they're burning it, they're grinding up highly radioactive contaminated stuff and burning incinerators right across the country. So how can it all be in all the tanks? All be in the tanks if they're doing stuff like that. Hot spots, 460 kilometers from the Meltdowns. So how can it be in the tanks? They got high levels in Osaka, 600 kilometers from the Meltdowns. So how can it be in the tanks? The 900 kilometers away, highly radioactive, so how can it be in the tanks? How can it be just in the tanks. And 1,000 kilometers away from Fukushima, high levels of radioactive fallout. So the question is, how can it be in the tanks when the whole country is buried in radiation? How does that actually work? And how can it be in the tanks and be in millions and millions and millions of one-ton bags of radiation at the same time? How does that work? How can you have everything in the tanks? How can the food be perfectly safe when they're actually harvesting it alongside of one-ton bags of radiation in a nuclear wasteland where no one lives, just a few miles away from multiple ongoing nuclear meltdowns, surrounded by 13 prefectures where the food is banned by 55 countries because it's not in the tanks? Does that make any sense? Does anything make any sense anymore? Does Fukushima Reactor 3 have worse damage than Reactor 1? I explained that for the first half an hour. It took a half an hour just to cover the story that probably took him 3 minutes to write because he told so many lies. So many lies, so little time. South Korea team ends inspection of Fukushima nuclear plant, and the Japanese media was like, so, it's all good. So you better take the food. In fact, Japan took South Korea to the World Trade Organization because they wouldn't take the food from the nuclear wasteland. And then they won. So South Korea was supposed to take the food from the nuclear wasteland. But they appealed it. It took about 1.5 years for the appeal to go through, so they didn't take the food during that time. And then the World Health Organization agreed they didn't have to take the radioactive food from the nuclear wasteland. That's the antiques. But what they do is the next administration will get seeded with pro-nuclear, with controlled opposition, right? Speaking to reporters, Fukushima town of Tomoka on Wednesday, which is a nuclear wasteland, by the way, the head of the South Korean Nuclear Safety Security Commission, leading the inspection team that didn't expect anything. The first time in history, by the way, in 12 years. And these were the same old, suggested the inspection will lead to progress in the safety assessment of planned water release. What a disgusting character he turned out to be. Now, we knew this, but we had to wait, right? But now we have confirmation. I actually got more thumbs up right now than I did in the last 24 hours total on my last video, which was dismally censored. That was the last 3 days of censorship is like, wow. I mean, the same people are always watching, they're just not registering it. And the likes, which is shares, are not registering it. South Korea expert lawyers visit Fukushima nuclear plant before the release of the treated water into the sea. So it's a foregone conclusion before the release of the treated. It's not treated, as I showed you. It's not in the tanks. There is no water. Nothing's treated because you can never change the filter. You can't filter water from a nuclear meltdown. It doesn't work that way for radiation, because radiation is energy. You can't, if you filter it, then you got gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas in the filter, which means you're going to have an uncontrolled chain reaction in the filter, right? You can't just filter one and leave the rest, so you're going to have a chain reaction in the filter if you try to filter it, which will do one of many things. It'll burn a hole right through the filter. You got to leave the building. But because you're having so much radiation going into the filter, you can never get back in the building. But when you're using gammas, X-rays, neutrons, and betas, and by proxy then X-rays, are in the filter, you're having a unmitigated chain criticality and chain reactions, small, that will burn at 1,000-degree temperatures. Despicable people is all I can say. Horrific. Areas reopen their Fukushima plant. Am I missing something? Yeah, we're missing the headline on that story. Don't worry about it. Oh, it makes sense in a second. A bunch of pictures, actually. Like, there's no safe area in Fukushima Prefecture, let alone near the multiple ongoing nuclear meltdowns. Officials from the Japanese government and the plant operator Tokyo were to show 21-member delegations, several facilities rated treatment, safety checks, transport, and dilution of the water, Japanese officials said Tuesday. Plants faced fierce protests this was artificial, right? To perpetrate the deception of the tritium and the censored version called treated, which is 100% fable. The whole country is radioactive from fallout, so there's nothing in the tanks. Tanks are empty. The tanks are empty. We know that because they got millions and millions and millions of one-ton bags. They didn't evacuate the communities because it wasn't in the tanks, or was in the tanks, or wasn't in the tanks. They evacuated because it wasn't in the tanks, I meant. Bear with me. My brain can only go so fast after. So, like when I do these shows, all you're really doing is watching a guy beat the shit out of himself for 2 hours. Asked if there is anything that can be done to quell South Korea's people anxiety. Is there anything that because they're protesting in the streets of South Korea for tritium. This is on purpose. This is sanctioned, right? This is meant, right, to cause this. It's just a silly public relation firm ploy, cooked up, and now we see it running its course. And they got a lot of the planet is yelling tritium, so to them it's a win. They don't care. Right? They perpetrate. It's in the consciousness of the majority of the population. Because you go ask anybody about dumping water in the sea from Fukushima, they're going to say the word tritium to you. And then they're going to say it's natural, so don't worry about it. And this is what they're up to. They don't care if everybody believes, as long as the majority does, right? But this is an extinction event. If we can explain in detail what we have inspected, I think it's meaningful. So now they're agreeing. Now they're not saying, well, you got to wait till we get back. They're like, well, yeah, probably. So this is a predetermined. Asked if there's anything can be done to quell South Korea's people anxiety. Wow. Provide a thorough explanation to the South Korea experts to show them the current status of the water tanks and other facilities in construction at the plant. Yeah, why don't you take us and show us the incinerators you got there while you at it? You got two there. You got a brand new shiny one too, right? I expect this will deepen the understanding in South Korea about the safety of our planned releases of the treated water. So it's a predetermined, 100% sham. And did we really expect anything less? I'm sure a lot of us out there were hoping that South Korea was going to put the screws to them. Like, secretly, I was hoping that. I never had much faith. But now that it's officially over, they're not going to show you any pictures. They're not going to show any videos. How come? After the second day at the plant yesterday, used team of scumbags is to meet with Japanese scumbags in Tokyo before heading home to our heroes' welcome. Tritium. The ultimate insult to humanity is nuclear. The ultimate insult to the millions of species is nuclear. Water used to cool the reactor cores is accumulating about 1,000 tanks at the plant. And I showed you all these stories about that. They were all built in 2013 and 14. And They claim there's 100 tons a day, which is equal to a garden hose split 4 ways, which is actually 140 tons a day, right? Garden hoses. U.S., I seen this story and I was like, what the hell is this? Well, first off, it's from the scumbags from the World Nuclear News, so probably lies. But the headline is pretty salacious, right? U.S. micro-reactor prototype prepares for testing. I was like, holy shit, did they actually do it? I was like, nah. The non-nuclear prototype. Bastards, man. U.S. micro-reactor prototype prepares for testing, but it's non-nuclear. They're going to use sodium potassium. The crazies never let us down, do they? That's one thing we can count on with the nuclear industry. They'll never let you down on being evil. The DP, South Korea's DP, grills foreign minister over Fukushima inspection. Ongoing Korean inspection of the ruined, which is another ruined. They're destroyed. Fukushima nuclear power plant in Japan took center stage. These are nuclear wastelands. I won't hear those words ever, by the way. In the political wrangling at the National Assembly's Foreign Policy Committee meeting on Wednesday, by sending a team to the plant to simply examine the facilities, they will not be able to confirm whether the water is actually safe to be released. Yeah, we should see a video of them drinking water right out of the tank. I'd like to see him get a selfie in Reactor 4. That'd be pretty cool. What the Korean government is doing is basically giving Japan an easy way out by sending a team to take a cursory look. The media wasn't allowed to accompany them. They were all from the scumbag nuclear industry. The ruined Fukushima nuclear disaster site and plan to release its treated water into the Pacific. They had never stopped releasing water into the Pacific. We already have an expert from the Korea Institute of Nuclear Safety. Well, by default, they're monsters, then, right? The DP members were instigating unnecessary fear in the public by his political wrangling. Unnecessary fear. Because South Korea wants to have a nuclear renaissance and build reactors worldwide. They can't do that if they don't come back with a perfect report card, right? To examine the advanced liquid processing system, I showed you all the documentation that earlier in 2014, in August the 14th, 2014, that thing didn't work. By the way, a single reactor typically uses 4,500 tons a minute, 1 million gallons a minute. That's enough to fill up all the tanks 6 times a day, every day. To examine the advanced processing system, which is, of course, the K4 tanks. These are big tanks that you're familiar with if you watch this much. The plant's operator, TEPCO, has said that all of the radioactive material have been removed from the water except tritium. And again, you see that sentence again, right? Which experts say is not harmful to human health in small amounts. Pretty despicable, but it's nuclear, so that's normal. Team will present their scientific objective findings when they return to Korea. No, they already did. The media already reported on it. They're not even on the plane yet. Korea government remains committed to ensuring transparency in the treatment and release of contaminated water. Well, the pictures I provided, you need to look at them. And they won't. Editorial: leave no stone unturned in bid to aid Fukushima communities. That's today or yesterday. This was just another pump for Fukushima Prefecture nuclear wasteland. The Nagadoro district of Iitate, Fukushima Prefecture, which has been abandoned for 12 years, because, everything's in the tanks, right? Mandatory orders to evacuate have been lifted for areas marked as reconstruction bases within 6 towns. We've covered this a lot over the years. and particularly this year, within 6 towns and villages designated as difficult to return zones. So they're talking about 3% of the entire areas. They're going to lift the restrictions. Draft legislation under deliberation and diet, which is the same as the Congress and Parliament, is to establish a new system of decontamination, lift evacuation orders for the remaining communities. Regarding difficulty return zones with especially high radiation levels, the government in 2016 announced its resolve to eventually lift all the evacuation orders everywhere. Again, right, you can do what you want, but the people are not going to move back there. They're not going to be hoodwinked anymore, right? For that, the government designated urban areas reconstruction zones and created a system under which state funds could be used for decontamination. You can't decontaminate until the reactors stop melting down. Reactors are still melting down, unfortunately. The fallout so there's so many of these models of fallout. This is the Neptunium-239 dispersal covering the planet. Here's the cesium-137 on the first 8 days or something. The French government, IRSN's radioactive fallout model, shown 1 million to 10 million, say, let's call it becquerels per square meter, cubic meter of air of cesium-137. Here's another model from the IRSN, this is France, is the same as the last one. This model is based on 31 days. I'm going to stop it on day 20. That's day 20. The whole planet is covered in radioactive fallout. And it ain't bananas and potato chips from walking in the sunshine. And so what they're talking about is removing the restrictions so people can just move back into the nuclear wasteland where they picked up 30 million one-ton bags of radiation, but they dumped that much into the rivers and the shorelines at night when nobody was looking. Try wrapping your mind around this. Lydia will be the first to lift evacuation orders without decontamination. So they're so complacent, they're so uncaring, they're so up themselves with power that they're not even going to decontaminate and let people move back into the nuclear wasteland because they just don't care about themselves, let alone anybody else. And the rest of it, we're never going to get to it tonight because it's been a long week, an absurd long week. It's a ridiculous amount of work. That's all good. Who cares, right? I got a couple days to recover, but I got a lot of work to get done in the next couple of days. We're hoping summer is going to show up. We want to get out on the ocean. We got to get the boat in the water. And I'm just a little over 2 months from surgery, so I got to jack the boat up, right, with the winch, the hand winch, and hook it up and get it in the water. And we got to try and see if we can figure out what's going on with the motor. And so that I got the batteries now charged up on the boat. We got the tarp off it. What a disaster that was. But I just wasn't healthy enough to go out and try to take the tarp off before it got torn apart. Not that I care, because they destroy themselves each year. We have to buy a new tarp to cover the boat each winter. Just the sun breaks them down, right? Yeah, well, I was just going to say we'll close the poll. I see James sent a PayPal. Or again, James? My goodness, that's twice in 1 week. I'm not complaining. Don't get me wrong. Just saying, bless your heart, man. You're good people. So, did Fukushima Reactor 3 have worse damage than Reactor 4? That's important. And the first half an hour, I went through that single story, sentence by sentence. It's absurd, really, when you think about it. Just like 2 Danas, that's absurd. And so we have a stunning 88%. So we got spammed, eh? Wow. Touchy subjects. Yeah, it was a great week, wasn't it, James? Thank you. Good night, everybody. Timothy, we'll see everybody